Hello everybody, welcome back to IndyCar on the 1st of August, coincidentally my 32nd wedding anniversary. Anyway, welcome to today's show. Today I'm going to be talking about, first of all, the Good Friday Agreement that affects both Northern Ireland and the Republic. Also about the effects of the no-deal Brexit date on the production of lamb and its effect on Highland livestock farmers. And finally, we'll have a look at the progress or lack of progress in the Scottish space race to have the first working spaceport in the Highlands and Islands. So we'll come back to that just in a moment. But first of all, to the Good Friday Agreement. And many of you will have heard the phrase Good Friday Agreement being bandied about during the most recent talks in Northern Ireland in an attempt to start up the power sharing executive in Stormont. What most people in the UK don't understand is how the Good Friday Agreement works and what it actually means. But basically what the Good Friday Agreement did, and it's an international bilateral agreement between two nations, between the Republic of Ireland, which of course represents the European Union, and the United Kingdom, which at the time the agreement was made was also a part of the European Union. Brokered internationally by Americans, by Bill Clinton among others, and brought peace to Northern Ireland at the turn of the millennium in 1999. What the Good Friday Agreement does is it does several things which up until that point would have been unthinkable. The first one is that the Republic of Ireland formally gave up its claim to the north. It relinquished its long-standing claim that the 6 counties of Northern Ireland actually belonged to the Republic. So that was the first thing. That was torn up. To balance that major major concession from the Republic, the United Kingdom was required to recognise something as well, and that was that although both the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom agreed that that Northern Ireland should remain a British territory, in other words, it would be part of the United Kingdom, it could only remain part of the United Kingdom by the consent of the people who live there. And if a majority of Northern Irish residents were to decide that they didn't want to remain in the United Kingdom, then a poll needed to be called, and this is the so-called border poll. This was part of a second strand of the agreement, which led to, if there was a majority in Northern Ireland in favour of leaving the United Kingdom and reuniting the north and the south of the island, then there had to be a border poll in which the voters of both the Republic and the 6 counties of Northern Ireland had to vote jointly on whether to reunify. This way, both countries had an equal say in the matter. Now, it's a complicated and sophisticated deal, but it was arranged to end years and years of conflict, in fact decades of conflict since the early part of the 1900s, at which point, if you know your history, in 1800 the Act of Union made the whole of Ireland a part of the United Kingdom, and that sparked off a series of wars which went on up until 1921, when eventually the Republic of Ireland was born after a very difficult and bloody battle, a war against the British Army, which eventually led to the setting up of the Republic and led the British government to partition the north and begin decades of bad feeling, conflict, sectarian division and so on. We know the rest. The problem is that Brexit has come along and basically jumped all over the sandcastle and smashed it to bits. Brexit seems at first glance to destroy everything that it comes into contact with. It has the Medusa touch, the opposite of the Midas touch. It turns everything to stone. It just basically turns everything that was good in Northern Ireland into bad. And simply because Brexit is not something favoured by the people of Northern Ireland. And part of the Good Friday Agreement said, actually, that if the people of Northern Ireland decided not to go for Brexit, then there was no way the British government could force the Northern Irish people against their will to become separated from the European Union and for there to be border posts erected along between the two parts of the north and the south. A very complicated situation, made worse by the fact that many people, particularly in England, know absolutely nothing about Irish history. And because they know nothing about it, they do not understand the depth of resentment that there has always been in Ireland towards the British state, for a number of very good historical reasons, which I'm not going to trouble you with just now. If you go and do your research, you'll find out yourself. But if you go and look up the Irish famine, you'll find out what I'm talking about. Anyway, to the present day. So Northern Ireland is not just a stumbling block for the United Kingdom when it comes to Brexit, it's a brick wall. They can't get past it. If Britain decides, and I say Britain in the loosest term here, I'm talking about England basically, if England decides it's going to Brexit and the rest of the United Kingdom can basically go hang, Scotland, you know, can have its economy destroyed, Northern Ireland have its economy destroyed, Northern Ireland will be condemned to having more sectarian violence and more terrorism as a result of the breaking of this Good Friday Agreement, then there is a lot of trouble ahead. And unfortunately, English voters who want out of the European Union do not realise the colossal amount of collateral damage that we're going to cause. Now, it's bizarre that people who claim to want to leave the European Union, who cite World War II a lot of the time, saying, you know, we fought to liberate Europe and blah, 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 and how strongly the UK fought to liberate Europe. But then again, Britain was faced with actually being overrun by Germany. It had to fight that war. And eventually it had to liberate Europe because there was no way of ending the war otherwise unless they beat the Germans. But since the liberation of Europe and since the peace that resulted from the formation of, first of all, the League of Nations, and then towards the first inklings of the European Union, ever since the end of World War II, Britain has been bitching about Europe. It's as if it's not enough that we've just freed and liberated Europe, but somehow or other they've gone and been all successful without us, and everybody's very bitter and resentful about it. Why is Germany so successful? We won the war. And since then, England has done nothing but carp about Europe. If it's not, you know, straight bananas, it's something else, it's kippers with ice blocks in them. There is always some pathetic thing that they want to latch onto. Something brilliant that happens through the European Union is always something that Britain fought for. Something that they don't like, that's inconvenient and isn't very nice. It's all the European Union's fault. Despite the fact that every single decision that the European has taken has been agreed to by the British government, because they have a say in the European Union as members. So they can't complain about the European Union when they take part in everything it decides. And if they didn't like something, they could veto it. And they've already vetoed so many things and got so many exemptions from things, you wouldn't believe it. You know, we're not using the European currency. We don't have to abide by the Schengen Agreement. There are all sorts of things which Britain has negotiated its separation from. So we're in a bizarre position where, for some but really odd reason, people, particularly in the south, resent the European Union immensely and want to get out of it. They feel somehow or other the European Union is running their lives, when in actual fact it's been their own government all along, and only about 5% of their decisions have been taken in Europe. Okay, enough politicising, but the point is that the Brexit agreement cannot trump the Good Friday Agreement, because there is no Brexit agreement. Brexit is a non-agreement, and a no-deal Brexit is an avoidance of agreements. It is a flouting all kinds of international laws and all kinds of international protocols by just simply sticking two fingers up to the European Union and saying, whistle for it, we're not going to pay what we owe, we're off, we just don't like you anymore. And this is an attitude which doesn't prevail anywhere else except, it seems, in the south. There are very few people in Scotland who feel this way. There are one or two, I'll grant you that. There are some people in Scotland who think we would be better off out of the European Union. But many of them also feel we would be better off out of the UK Union as well. Interestingly, the British government attempted to have the Good Friday Agreement, the section of it which was annoying them the most about not being able to erect any kind of physical apparatus to control the border. When that got in their way, the British government tried to get their Supreme Court to overrule an international treaty. Now, British Supreme Court is not sovereign over an international treaty, and so they couldn't, despite the British so-called Supreme Court ruling that the Good Friday Agreement didn't stand in the face of Brexit. They couldn't make it stick because it's an international bilateral agreement witnessed by the entire international community, ratified in the European Union, ratified by America, the UN. Britain cannot break that agreement. They know it. So they're in big trouble in Northern Ireland. So Boris Johnson, whatever he says and whatever Arlene Foster says in Northern Ireland, they cannot do anything about the Good Friday Agreement. And most, as far as I can hear from people in Northern Ireland, most of the younger people in Northern Ireland are dead set against any breakage of contact with the European Union. Anything to do with Brexit is not what they want. And remember that there are more and more young people coming into the demographic all the time. These are young people who grew up with peace. They grew up without the bombing, without the shootings, without the threats. And the more that peace lasts and the longer it goes on, and the more peaceful the island becomes, the more difficult it is to tell people that it's time to go back to the way it was before, because that is what the British would do. They would throw Ireland under the bus in order to get out of Europe. Okay, away from Europe now, back to Scotland, but still on the subject of Brexit. News in a lot of different news sources today are reporting that Scottish livestock farmers, particularly in the Highlands and Western Islands, and the Western Highlands, are very angry and extremely worried at the fact that the Brexit date, the 31st of October, Halloween, is right at the height of the livestock selling season. These people are raising lambs, they're raising cattle in their Highland crofts and farms, feeding them up through the winter months and then bringing them to market to get the best price they can in the autumn, when these animals will be further fattened up and being made ready for the dinner table. But the problem is that they don't know what price to pitch these animals at when they take them to be auctioned, because they have no idea what lamb as a commodity, or beef as a commodity for that matter, would be worth. Because with a no-deal Brexit looming, if this happens, there would be an instant 40% levy on all exports of livestock and meat into the European Union, and that would instantly make that livestock far less competitive, which means that these farmers are not going to get the same money for their lambs. They're not going to get the same price they would normally get for their cattle either. And they are rightfully concerned that if no deal Brexit goes ahead, many of them could go under. They're not going to make enough money to keep going through the winter and to carry on into the next season. So this is a very real concern. It's not just a scare story. This is a reality for hill farmers. Now, as well as losing, if you'll recall, £160 million worth of European farming aid, which was illegally diverted from Scottish hill farmers to the agricultural sector in England, and it's being withheld from them at the moment. Again, another story in the Highlands this week is the continuing saga of the Moinne Peninsula and the so-called Sutherland spaceport. This is a spaceport which is being proposed by the UK government and being partly, I was going to say sponsored, but let's say pledged. Lockheed Martin, a massive multi-billion-dollar American aerospace and arms manufacturer, is underwriting the project and promising to pump, I think if I remember correctly, it was somewhere in the region of about £70 million into the project to build a spaceport on the Moinne Peninsula in Sutherland, on a piece of boggy marshland where there are no services and no roads and no power lines and no way of getting in and out of it. Apparently today we hear that Highlands and Islands Enterprise are now trying to set up a system whereby the Crofters, whose land this spaceport would occupy, can lease the land, presumably to the government, the UK government, to build this spaceport, which is going to be bankrolled by an American multi-billion-dollar transnational arms corporation. Now, the whole thing of this so-called spaceport, this alleged spaceport, is that it's very vague. It's in a strange place. It's not in the optimum place to launch satellites, even into polar orbit. And it comes at a time when there are two rival bids from private enterprise consortiums in both North Uist in the Western Isles and in Shetland in the Northern Isles. Both sites, incidentally, would have a clear sight over the sea to the North Pole. Both would be excellent launch sites. Neither of them is particularly fog prone, and both of them would offer, I would say, strong rivals or strong competition, shall we say, to this cuckoo in the nest UK spaceport, which is pretty much being imposed on the Highlands rather than the Highlands and Islands Enterprise coming up with this idea. This appears to have come from the British Space Agency in Leicester. So we have a kind of space race going on between two rival Scottish spaceport schemes in the Western Isles and in Shetland, and this UK supposed spaceport. I say supposed spaceport because at the moment this is all just on paper. There have been more concrete steps taken in North Uist and in Shetland, and the local consortia who have got together local businesses to raise the funding to build these launch facilities are already making ready. The spaceport, or the space hub, whatever it's called, in the Moinne Peninsula is at the moment just a notional idea. And every time I see more news about it, I'm still waiting to say, well, when are they going to start cutting soil? When are they going to start laying foundations? When is the big corporation from America going to show up and say, this is what we're going to build? And it's suspicious that none of that is happening. So anyway, that's about the news for today. But remember that the Good Friday Agreement is not something that the United Kingdom can break. And this is worth pointing out. If you want to know about the Good Friday Agreement, look it up on Wikipedia and read the history of it and how it came about and what it means. But what it means is that if the people of Northern Ireland decide that Brexit is going to make it untenable for them to stay in the United Kingdom, that if they demand a border poll, then there must be a border poll, and the people of the north of Ireland and the people of the Republic can then choose if they wish to reunify, and there is nothing that the British government or even the Irish government can do about that. It is the will of the people of Ireland that is the key here. And just like in Scotland, where the people of Scotland are sovereign, in this particular case the people of both the north and the south of Ireland would be sovereign. They would get to choose. Now it's interesting that the Good Friday Agreement confers the right on Irish people of both sides to choose the form of government that best suits their needs. And the claim of right in Scotland does the same thing for us. But despite constant questioning online, nobody seems to have come up with a methodology which ensures that the new NDREF 2 is going to be legal. So I was just thinking last night, and this is an idea I'd like to put out there for you to think about, that considering that the claim of right means that sovereignty in Scotland, the decision-making power, rests with us, the individuals, the citizens, that a new form of legislation be drawn up which temporarily confers the power of sovereignty from the citizens of Scotland and confers those powers on the Scottish Parliament and allows the Scottish Parliament to draw up legislation which makes it legal and binding to have a referendum, one which is entirely lawful, and in which, instead of a Section 30 order, we have created a, what should we call it, a Scottish Citizens Sovereignty Transfer Order, where we temporarily transfer the power over our ability to vote for what we want to happen in the future, we give that power to our Parliament. We know that Westminster claims that their Parliament is sovereign, and it is sovereign in England. In Scotland, the people are sovereign, but I think in the case of a referendum, we need to transfer our sovereignty to our Parliament so that that Parliament can then create the legislation to make a referendum legal. I'm not a lawyer, but it struck me it might be one way of getting around this stupid notion of having to get a Section 30 order to make any kind of vote legal or not. If the power is then transferred temporarily from the citizenry to the Scottish Parliament, that would empower them to create legislation, and that legislation is the same as a Section 30 order. It embodies the will of the people and gives it to the Scottish Government to run that referendum. And when that referendum is over, then that is the settled will of the people expressed through their Parliament, which was temporarily sovereign while this process was going on. It's a way of doing it which I think legally helps to focus the what should we say, the sovereign power of Scotland like a lens into Holyrood, and gives Holyrood that sovereignty which it lacks at the moment. Anyway, just some food for thought. I'll leave you with that for today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye bye for now.